Lee, I'll come to you first of all to start us off. Can you talk to us a little bit about the overarching sentiment that we've seen from occupiers over the last 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think, James, the one thing I'd say about 2022 was, lots of volatility, lots of changes and dynamic changes within the macroeconomic environment and the operating environment that occupiers are actually making their decisions in. And one of the problems that we've typically had as an industry is an inability to really look at that short-term volatility and how it changes behavior. So if you look at most research that's out there, it tends to be about a sort of 3-year future gaze as to where corporate real estate may be down the line. But it doesn't take into account that sort of volatility that one tends to experience, and we've certainly been experiencing since the onset of the pandemic. So what we did at the start of 2022 was embark on a new initiative, a global corporate real estate sentiment index. And in that, we sort of asked 12 very basic statements and asked people to effectively plot their sentiment from negative to positive around these statements. And without getting into too much of the detail, the index sort of broke down into sort of 3 component parts: attitudes towards future growth, both macro and corporate level; attitudes around portfolio dynamics and how they're likely to change; and attitudes around the workplace and how that was changing. And there's some interesting observations, I think, as we went through the course of 2022. The first one would be that sentiment declined markedly quarter on quarter. It looks like it might stabilize as we get to the end of the year and into the start of 2023. There's a bit of stabilization, but most of the fear and most of the sort of negativity was around the macroeconomic environment. Huge fall away in terms of global economic growth, which didn't actually filter through into corporate performance, corporate growth around revenue, headcount, capital expenditure, all things that you need to advance real estate. We didn't really see that coming through until sort of perhaps half point of the year. And I think what that led to was many occupiers kind of applying the brakes and only really acting when they needed to, when their lease breaks and expiries either enabled them to or forced them to act. But outside of that, so recognizing that sentiment has deteriorated over the course of the year, there are also some other sort of very clear observations. One was that most corporate real estate leaders were focused on intervening in their existing workplaces. So they were really focused not on portfolios and changing the portfolio, offshoring, relocating, any of that, but actually focused on the space they had, looking at the services and amenities within that space and looking to try and raise up the level of occupancy that they were experiencing as we came out of the pandemic. Now, just to be clear, most respondents to the sentiment index are very clear that they're not likely to get back to pre-pandemic levels of occupancy. So flexibility in the workforce, in work styles, is here to stay. And I think that will be a very clear influence on the workplace and on corporate real estate behaviors over the course of the next 3 years. So there's that point. And then I suppose the final point around all of this was just the whole attitude around cost. We know that real estate is essentially the second largest operating cost of any organization. Arguably, it's the most easy to address, although some would suggest otherwise. Yeah. And as a result, I think the environment that we're going into, certainly in the first part of 2023, where that macroeconomic story is still a little negative, is likely to be very cost-driven and cost-sensitive. So, in essence, that's sort of the overarching findings of sentiment through 2022 into early 2023.
That's interesting. You talk about sort of stabilizing. I mean, Phil, I'll come to you first. I mean, for you, you've been in the role
a year and a half,
yep. And it was, you went into something completely new, yep. Where you were almost setting up a team from yep. scratch. I mean, for you, I imagine stabilizing was a big thing because you were trying to get systems in place and understand the full operation. But then, how much could you really take action in what, make real action and real change? Or yep. How much was consolidating and what do we have and how can we plan ahead?
Yeah, a bit of both, really. And I think, you point out the fact that, they're coming into a new role that it didn't exist within the organization. And every time we talk, and, I think that the big difference within organizations, when you're looking at corporate real estate, it's about the maturity levels of that corporate real estate function. So Alison, I know Alison came in a similar situation to me, not dissimilar.
Yeah.
But Alison's 4 or 5 years now, I think. Yeah, something like that, compared to me, who's now a year. And my challenge is very much around the fact that I'm coming into a decentralized organization, not a centralized organization. And I can't underestimate the challenge that is. And into an organization that has never really looked strategically at their real estate. So it has been like anything of these things, it's all around these days, especially around data. So my first thing was like, just let's try and figure out what we've got. So that was my first challenge, and that's still ongoing. A year and a half later, it's still ongoing. It's a lot better than it was. And then understanding really about the business, trying to understand what are the key drivers in the business, and then thinking, how do I translate that into real estate, and what can I do to make the change? And truly, honestly, it is much more challenging than I expected. And it's all around, for me, it's educating my business and trying to make them understand what I'm trying to do and why the benefits are. So in terms of what Lee describes, I think is sentiment-wise, yes, I think you're right about trying to, from my perspective, it's about trying to change the existing space that we have today and trying to make them real. And it's interesting, my organisation, it's really, because again, they've never looked at strategic. The way they look at it is they look, this is what we have today, this is what we'll have tomorrow, i.e. the next day, not what we will have in 5 years' time when you're signing a 10-year lease or a 5-year lease. So they're very narrow in their views. And I'm trying to make that change, make them understand, and we're very, very inefficient user of space. And they are, and again, I think it comes back to because we're decentralized, they are so reluctant to let go of space, which I find utterly unbelievable in an organization that's clearly stating we need to reduce our costs, because inflation is killing us. As an organisation, it's utterly killing us because it goes on to we have contracts that are based on inflation with our guards. So if we're not increasing that inflation, and we are a very low margin business. We're not in the financial services business. We're in a very low margin business. So I'm trying to make as much change as I can that is beneficial to the business. But there is a huge reluctance and it varies from country to country, and every CEO is different. And like I say, one CEO here is really forward thinking, the other one is not. So, but I think generally, from my purely selfish position, I'm trying to affect the space. I'm not looking at portfolio level because number one, because I can't, because I haven't got the data yet. So it is very much, and trying to get those wins. For me, it's about those wins. And in real estate, as you know, nothing happens quickly unless you get an opportunity. And I've not had that opportunity. I've completed one project in a year and a half, and the others are coming up now. So yeah, I think generally, I agree with Lee in the sense that for me, it's been very focused at the space level, not about the portfolio level. So I guess where your focus is maybe slightly changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about 2 years ago, it was about COVID. It was about return to the offices. It was about making offices safe, making sure you had silent running in a very unstable environment. Towards the end of 2022, I'd say that in the UK, we're a stabilised business. We've got people regularly coming into the office, and I think in the UK, we've definitely got to a point we're in the new norm now. So that is probably 2-3 days in the office. Like most organisations, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are probably more popular than the Mondays and Fridays, but we've got a healthy occupancy across the week, which I'm really pleased to see now. But I think what we've seen across the globe is that each country's slightly different. I've been to, in the last 6 months, I've been to Singapore and I've been to New York. 2 very, very different environments.
Polar opposite.
When it comes to, in the normal sense of the word, but also just in terms of their return to work, how they're dealing with the pandemic. And there's absolute differences. The scene in New York is, people are very reluctant to come back into the office. They're concerned about personal safety, walking from train stations. There's increase in crime. There's perception of increase in crime. So people do not want to return to the office there. In Singapore, it's different again there as well. And I haven't been to Hong Kong yet, but hopefully at some point, I may get to Hong Kong this year. And again, that will be completely different again. But what I'm hearing is we've actually got a very, very healthy return to the office in Hong Kong. People want to be there. So, reviewing towards the end of the year, I think, unlike many other businesses or other departments within organisations, particularly from a facilities management point of view, the work never stopped. It wasn't that people were sent home and didn't do anything. We've, as a team, we've had a really challenging couple of years. And, just in terms of the resiliency of the team, this is their mental health, making sure that people rested. the team are tired. They've had a number of stresses, personal stress as well as work stress, project stress over the last couple of years, and it's not going to stop going into 23. You know, I'm already thinking, how are we going to deliver our projects? And this is not relocations. This is refreshes. This is the demand of the business because we want to do more entertaining in the offices rather than external entertainment. It all involves, you know, organization, thoughts, you know, potentially long nights as well. So it's the balance of being in a cost-conscious world, making sure we're delivering high quality, you know, facilities and events, whilst also making sure that we're looking after the pennies as well. So that is a very different environment. You know, so 23 is, you know, then, you know, balancing that with the cost of living, you know, particularly for our suppliers as well. You know, we've got, you know, many people in our organization are not, you know, they're not asset managers. They're not earning, you know, to the same level. So trying to balance that across an organization is going to be very tricky.
So when you've seen that return to work, Alison, have you seen a difference in the way that people are working, the way that people are engaging with the office, the things that they're doing in the office, and as a consequence, a different ask from the office environment and the services you provide, or is it sort of plugging back into the work environment of the pre-COVID?
I think it depends on the you know, what they actually do in their day-to-day roles. Some teams never left the buildings, you know, because there was regulatory reasons for why they had to be in, and they've probably working the exact same way. What we have done is we've adapted our technology. We found that when we, if I think about our global headquarters, you know, that was fitted out 5 years ago. It was designed 8 years ago. That technology was, you know, fantastic 8 years ago. When we moved into the building, it was still very, very good, but it was still very much on the model of being in the office, being present in the office, even though that, you know, you had all the communication ability to have remote meetings. It wasn't used. It was very much people being in the office. And even though there were meetings with our international offices, you know, our etiquettes were probably not as shiny as they should be. Now, today we've enhanced our technology. We've now got you know, we realized we had to balance the experience in the office, had to be as good as being out of the office, because what was happening is people were actually saying, I'll just stay at home, you know, because I can hear it better, I can be more involved than actually being in the meeting room in the building, which is it's totally counterintuitive, but that's what we found. And that was probably with the first year, you know, between first and second lockdown. So we did a lot of work then to enhance technology. We do see some teams working in slightly different ways. Now that is, if I think of my travel team, for example, they come in once or twice a week and they are in a room all together with an open line. And that's how they work all day long, you know, so they come together for specific reasons. And the rest of the time they work from home, which for them is appropriate. At the moment, you know, they're delivering projects in the US, at the moment they're delivering projects in Asia, you know. I think it would be unreasonable for me to expect them to be in the office every single day when they're up at 4 or 5 in the morning so that they can deliver a project. So, but that might change in another year's time. So back to that flexible working policy, you know, it's client, it's team, and then it's the individual. That, you know, that's the criteria, not that, well, you know, I want to work from home on a Friday because it suits me. You know, that's and as managers, I think the skill set has to improve. You know, how you manage people, how you can keep track, not keeping track, but making sure people are delivering to their objectives, their priorities. That's what the conversation needs to be about nowadays, rather than, oh, what time have you come in at, or anything else? You know,
it was that myth of how do you measure productivity? And before it was just, well, if you're at your desk by 9 and you don't leave before 5, then you're being productive.
You've had a really good day.
Time well spent.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you touched on some really interesting things. I mean, one, I think, having been to your office in London, you had created a wonderful collaborative space anyway. So the technology upgrade was the next piece to the jigsaw. A lot of people didn't have that wonderful collaborative space to be able to come in and drop down in different areas and work in a different way. And you've got teams who found ways to collaborate in a different way. And then if I looked to, there was a piece you said, Philip, about cultural differences, and we looked at Singapore versus New York, and it's that mandate or not mandate to come back in. is going to be so different from country to country.
It
Because what you do in Germany is going to be different to
Very
what you
different.
do
in Luxembourg.
Yeah.
If you're living in Germany, traveling into Luxembourg.
exactly
that,
right.
Or vice versa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
So, that challenge that you particularly have as heads of real estate who are trying to create a strategy and a plan. And we talked earlier about, before we started, about having a sort of a guide for how we fit out offices, but that's still going to be influenced by the people who are using it, because you need to create spaces that people want to come into and use, because otherwise they will just sit at home
It's
and
easy.
do their Teams calls or their Zoom calls or whatever it is from home.
So you said it, Alison. I think it's about managing complexity,
It is.
because I think what we've seen is the genie's come out of the bottle on flexible working.
Yeah.
That's landed differently in different organisations, different cultures,
Yeah.
and as a result, there isn't a uniform approach to work, which we tended to have when everybody was on the commute in the main, the commute to the office 5 days a week, and as a result, you ended up with global playbooks and all these things. I mean, one would argue with in a world where you're managing complexity, the global playbook's dead, right? I mean, you have to modify it utterly.
Yeah, I mean, I think
which makes your life more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a tone an organisation needs to set, and leadership team need to set.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then it has to be overlaid by local, whatever the local regulations are. But equally, the management team, they've got to, and we need to. Any manager needs to actually live by that as well. I mean, I'm probably in the office 4 days a week. That's so I can see my leadership team and the teams, and my wider team. Because if I'm not in at least 4 days or 3 days, I probably don't get round to seeing everybody. And then I'll miss somebody, and it'll be 3 weeks before I see them again. Personally, I don't think that's right. No. So and that's probably a slightly different attitude that some other managers would take.